As we know, there was reporting this morning that Judge Engoron in Nassau County had a bomb threat at his home. We don't have any specificity as to whether or not he was actually inside his home when that bomb threat came through, but Nassau County police responded there. Nonetheless, court is going to go on as scheduled beginning at 10 a.m. And there has been, Willie, a lot of back and forth over the last couple of days as to whether Trump was going to be able to offer his own closing remarks today. And finally, Judge Engoron said no. And that's because they didn't make the deadline noon yesterday. Here was part of what he laid out when it came to the parameters of what the former president needed to follow if he was going to offer some of those closing arguments, saying this: Trump would be allowed to speak only about material facts that are in evidence and application of the relevant law to those facts. He also said he will not allow a campaign speech or to attack the court, the staff, or AG Letitia James. The former president's attorneys didn't respond in time, so Judge Engoron essentially said, nope, it's not happening. Now, you and I and everybody knows that doesn't mean the former president's attorneys are not going to enter this courtroom this morning at 10 a.m. and argue to allow the former president to offer his closing remarks. It seems as though Judge Engoron is not going to allow that to happen. So let's talk about the TikTok, right? 2 hours of closing remarks from the defense team, 2 hours of closing remarks from the prosecution as well. And then they'll adjourn. And then we're going to wait for that decision. Engoron has been really tactical and very meticulous throughout this entire trial. So the expectation that he will offer a decision on fines will be within the next couple of weeks. It's not likely to happen within the next couple of days. Two other things really I want to point out, right? Initially, the fines that were asked for by AG Letitia James was at $250 million. That has now been raised to $370 million. She is also requesting that he be banned from working in New York City for life, banned from working as an officer or director of the New York City Corporation. And I don't want us to be fooled by this, right? Thinking about, Willie, and we all know this, right, who former President Trump is and what he has based his life and his identity on over the last half century. It has been about New York real estate, right? It has been about his businesses here in New York City. You think about the multiple indictments, you think about the criminal charges as well. This is going to hit really hard. And by the way, I just got word from my producer as well that Letitia James is just arriving at court now. So 10 a.m., it looks like they're going to be up and going.
All right, MSNBC's Yasmin Basugian. Yasmin, thanks so much. I know you keep us updated all day on that story. So, John, Lisa Rubin reminded us, by the way, earlier this morning that these are not special rules for Donald Trump. These are the rules a judge would give any lawyer addressing the court, but also the bomb threat this morning. Thank God no one was hurt. Thank God it sounds like there wasn't a bomb there, but a bomb threat nevertheless. This comes in the context of Donald Trump saying there's going to be bedlam in the streets if I'm convicted on all these charges, creating a climate for this kind of thing among his supporters.
Becoming all too common. Bomb threats, swatting incidences, other threats. Just in the last couple of weeks, this happened to Jack Smith in his suburban Washington, D.C. home. It happened to the Secretary of State in Maine after she made the decision that Trump shouldn't be on the ballot there. And now Judge Engoron. And this is, we have talked you and I have had this conversation dozens of times in the last year or so, how law enforcement officials really fear this culture of political violence that could surround the 2024 election. That the January 6th, one of them has told me, was just the beginning. That violence and the threat of violence is becoming far more commonplace and seemingly acceptable in the hard right, in the MAGA world. And Donald Trump certainly does nothing to dissuade his supporters. At times seems like he's outright encouraging them. So we're certainly glad nothing happened today, that no one was hurt. But these threats are going to continue, and one of these days, the great fear is it's not just going to be a threat, it's going to be real.
Yeah, that is the big concern, guys, that it takes that step. This is not a hypothetical. We all watched January 6th with our own eyes. When Donald Trump gives permission for something, it can happen.
It really can, and Amanda, you're obviously focused on democracy, and like me, as a conservative, I'm a former Republican. I'm not sure if you're former, but we look at the language that comes from my old party and bedlam. He talks about bedlam. He talks about these judges and prosecutors being traitors. He talks about executing generals that are insufficiently loyal to him. He talks about he can use SEAL Team 6 to execute political rivals, and he will be immune from prosecution from the courts. He talks about being retribution. He talks about being a dictator from day one. You add all of this up, and it leads us where? To a bomb threat against a judge. And again, that threat just grows by the day.
I think we need to be really clear that this is political violence. The violence is here. We saw it January 6th, and it is continuing. And there is this tendency on the Republican side to somehow treat these as separate stories. Oh, there's the Republican primary and the election that's happening, and then there's all this stuff that Donald Trump has to deal with. We were talking earlier about Nikki Haley taking the case to Donald Trump and why she doesn't do it. I think it's an insult to Republican voters to somehow say, we can't explain this to you. Are you really telling me, Nikki Haley, that you can't go to voters and say why it's bad for a president to have immunity and be able to shoot and execute his political rivals, to make threats against people who served in his administration? I mean, that is just, it's ridiculous. And, it's not just to the people running for president. It even comes sometimes from well-meaning people like Mitt Romney, who said last week that he thought the democracy pitch was a bust. He comes from a place of good faith, but he is just wrong on that. Just because that pitch hasn't worked maybe for him doesn't mean it doesn't work. Somebody has to make it, and it can't just be a Chris Christie.
It worked for Democrats in 22. We heard that democracy was going to be a bust, that Dobbs was going to be a bust, a red wave was coming. It was just the opposite.
Yes.